This is a story about one of my children when she was a very little girl. So her mother took her shopping to buy her clothes, shoes. It was a whole day adventure. And the whole day my wife took her from this store to that store, this store to that store, to buy her what she needed. I guess it was close to the new school year. So they came home, and my wife asked her to do something, some small chore. And she said, no, not doing it. Anyway, at that point I walk into the house. Father knows best. And my wife says to me, she can't believe it. She took such and such, I won't mention which daughter it was, went to the store the whole day, took her around shopping, buying her shoes and clothes and this and that. And I asked her to do a small thing, and she says no. So I say, you don't understand. From her perspective, she spent the whole day helping you. Because it's your job to buy her clothes, right? And really, you should have to do it without her, which makes it harder. And instead, she was gracious enough to spend the entire day helping you buy the clothes. And after helping you the whole day, again, you ask for another favor. That's why she said no. So my wife says, that's ridiculous. That makes no sense. And I say, I'll prove to you it doesn't make sense. So I call the daughter over, and I say, such and such. Tell me. She says, the whole day you were with the Ima, and she asked you to do something. He said, no. And she says, the whole day I was helping her. What do you see from the story? You see from the story an amazing, amazing thing. That sometimes someone can be doing everything for you, and you're convinced that you're doing that person the favor. In other words, that person is motivated by self-interest, and you are helping him or her. In reality, it's the opposite. That person is doing everything for you. And obviously, in this instance, it was a question of immaturity. The young child can't understand any better. But the truth is, there is a relationship, a certain relationship, where we all make the same mistake. And this is in our relationship with God, with Rebbeinu Shalom. Because we have mitzvahs, a lot of mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs. And we think the exact same thing. We think we are doing for God. We are doing for God. To the extent that we really believe that we've worked hard for Him. And the reality is the exact opposite. That all the mitzvahs He gives us are really for our benefit. And really, in giving us the mitzvah and in insisting that we do the mitzvah, He's doing us the biggest favor. But we, because of our lack of sophistication, think the exact opposite. We think that God is motivated by self-serving desire, and He's imposing His will upon us and making demands of us. But it's a mistake. So now let me share with you a Gemara, which tells a similar story, and then we can begin to turn to the parsha. The Gemara tells a story about a famous convert to Judaism, Onkelos. Now, you know, the Aramaic translation of the Torah was written by Onkelos. So Onkelos bar Kloni Musagayer, he converted to Judaism. Now, he was a relative of the Roman emperor. And this was considered a great tragedy. So they tried to retrieve him, to capture him, bring him back. So Shodar Kaiso Gunda de Romaya Basre. So the Caesar sent a regiment of Roman soldiers to retrieve Onkelos. What happened? Mashchinu Bekroi, Onkelos drew them close with biblical verses, and Igur, and they all converted too. So not too successful. So he sent another regiment. So Shadar Gundud Ramoy Achmina Basrei. So the emperor sent a second regiment, this time with a warning. Amr Lahu, he told them, Lo Timrulei V'Lo don't say anything to him. Don't get involved in a discussion. Because if you get involved in a discussion, he might convert you too. So just bring him back, but don't get into a conversation. So okay, so they're schlepping him back. As they were traveling back, so Amrlahu, Uncle said to them, I'm going to discuss a worldly matter, nothing to do with religion. Just a very interesting worldly matter. You know, there are various levels of officers in the Roman hierarchy. So one of them is called a nifura. A nifura, very high officer. But nifura nakad nura kame pipura. The nifura carries the torch for the pipura. Let's say they're walking together. So one of them has to carry the torch for the other. So who carries for whom? The lower one carries for the higher one. So the nifura carries the torch for the pipura. The pipura, leduchsa, he carries it for a duchsa. Duchsa, lehegmaina, he carries it for the hegmaina. Hegmaina lekuma, the hegmaina carries it for the kuma. So this is the highest level. Kuma minakit nura makami inshi. Does the kuma, who's the highest, does he hold the torch for anybody? So Amr Leilov, they said no, he's the highest. So no, he doesn't hold the torch for anybody. It's the lower person who holds for the higher. This is the highest person. So Amr Lahu, so Uncle said, you know, that's interesting. Because because God carries a torch for the Jewish people. Where do we know this from? The Chsiv, it says in the Pasuk that when the Jews were traveling from Mitzrayim, it says, V'Hashem holech lifneim yomom ba'ud onan, that by day God traveled before them in a pillar of cloud, and at the Lyle and at night, ba'amud eish, and a column of fire, lohayer lahem, to illuminate their path. So you see that God himself carries a torch for us. The guy are cool, we all converted. Then you have to understand, like, it's an interesting point, but like, in other words, in the Roman bureaucracy, the Kuma holds a torch for nobody, but God holds a torch for the Jewish people, and they heard this, they just went bananas, and they converted. Okay, we'll come back to this. So, Hadar Shadagunda Achmina Basrei. So the Caesar did it a third time. So Amr Lahu, so he warned them, Lo tishto umidi ba'adei, don't discuss anything with him. Don't let him say anything, don't say anything to him, just carry him back in silence. So Kinakle ba'azli, as they were carrying him, so Chazam mezuz d'Raman chapischa. So he saw a mezuzah, Uncle saw a mezuzah by a doorway. So Eisiv Yadei Allah, he put his hand on the mezuzah. You know, when you walk out the door, you put your hand on the mezuzah. So this was so curious, they had to ask him, what are you doing? So Va'armalu Maihai, what's this? Oh, excuse me. Va'armalu, and Uncle said to them, what is this? Right, what do you think this is? So they said to him, and well or not, you tell us, you know. What are you asking us a question? What do we think it is? You know. So Amrulu, so Uncle said like this. Minhago shalaylam, in the normal way of the world, melach basav adam yoshiv b'bifnim. A king sits inside, va'avadav mishan masav b'bachutz, and his guards stand outside and they guard him. V'lo kadosh baruch hu, it's not that way. Avadav b'bifnim, his servants are inside, v'hu mishan b'bachutz, and God stands outside and guards them. That's what the mezuzah. The mezuzah is God guarding us. Shneimar, as it says in the verse, Hashem yishmar tzeischa uvayecha mi'atzav yarolam. God guards your comings and goings forever. So Igayir, they also converted, right? And Sulo Shadar Basvei. So after 3 times, the Caesar got the point, message, and he didn't try to retrieve Onkelos. And of course, Onkelos became the famous author of the Targum on Chumash. What was so amazing about this insight of Onkelos, about the torch, about the mezuzah, that they heard this one thought and they were inspired to convert? It's exactly what we've been explaining. Now, really, all religions are pretty much the same. Now, there is a deity who is the king, so to speak. We are his subjects. We serve him, and so on and so forth. So, in this religion, they do it this way. In this religion, they do it this way. Here, they conceive of him this way. Here, they conceive of him this way. So, these are details. But generally, we tend to think that all the religions are basically the same. So, what's the point? If you have one religion, why change? There's no difference, no fundamental difference. Because if you were a Greek who worships Zeus, why should you convert and become a Roman who worships Jupiter? It's really pretty much the same. So Onkelos told him that Judaism is different. We have a totally different conception of God's involvement with us. Because to you, the deity is the king, and we are meant to serve the king. But the king's demands are self-serving. The king makes demands for himself. The king requires the service, or he desires the service, and we are doing for him. In Judaism, it's not that way. In Judaism, God does for us. So the first example was the torch. Right? We're traveling in the dark. God illuminates the way for us. The second example is the mezuzah. We're sitting inside, safe and sound. And who's guarding us? God is guarding us. And to the Roman, this was such a radical idea that as soon as they heard it, there is such a religion that believes this about God, they just had to convert. They had to drop whatever they were into until that point, and they just had to embrace this unbelievable religion, which has a conception of God as God being there to serve us. Now again, this is a very, very high level of sophistication. Let's understand it a little bit deeply. Because in reality, don't we intuit that we are serving God? I mean, isn't really this way the religion is presented in the Torah? No, Hashem is our Father, Hashem is our King, and we have to serve Him, we have to show obedience. I mean, is it really as Onkelos described it? He says it is, but it's a little more subtle. The idea is like this, that what we really want in life is our lives should be meaningful. That's what we really want in life. Because pleasure is nice, but more important than pleasure is meaning. And to be part of something which is very, very important, very, very significant, very, very grand, invests our lives with purpose and meaning. You know, sports fans, when their team wins the Stanley Cup or the Super Bowl or whatever, the World Series, they are very, very happy about that. Because why is that? Because vicariously, they are participants in the victory. In reality, what is their role? Very, very minor. Maybe they bought a few tickets, maybe they support the team, maybe they follow the team, but they are invested in the successes of the team, and therefore the team has a victory. This is very meaningful, very, very significant. And if that's true, when you attach yourself to a sports team, how many times more so is it true when you attach yourself to the King of all kings, the Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu? To be His servant is not so much you are doing for Him. He is doing for you. He is doing for you by allowing you to serve Him, by allowing you to be a part of His enterprise. Our lives become filled with meaning, with value, with fulfillment, and therefore, in reality, He is doing more for us than we are doing for Him, by far, by far, by far. But it's very subtle, because it's not that He does for us only by giving us, which is certainly partially true. God supports us, sustains us, protects us, illuminates the way for us. But really, it is through serving Him that our lives are enriched, and therefore by allowing us to serve Him, He is providing for us more than we could possibly provide for him. This is an important idea. And God does not need and does not want any martyrs. In other words, he doesn't want you to feel, I have sacrificed. He wants you to feel that your lives are enriched by his allowing us to be involved with him. Okay, this is the introduction. Now let's come to the parsha. Parshas Beha'alotcha is a turning point. It's really a turning point. The first part of Sefer BaMidbar, which describes the array of the machna, of the camp, the preparation of the groundwork for the ultimate entry into Eretz Yisrael, the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. There's a certain excitement, a certain joy, a certain enthusiasm, high hopes for the future. And there is a turning point in our parsha where everything falls apart. One person made an amazing observation I saw on the internet. This is one of those things which is proof that God has a sense of humor. The chapter where everything turns bad is Perek Yud Aleph, which is chapter 11. The entire enterprise goes bankrupt at this point. The Jews go into chapter 11. It's an interesting thought, but it's true. It's Perek Yud Aleph. That's where it happens. And you have a series of calamities. A series of calamities. First, the Jews complain about how weary they are on their travels, and fire breaks out and consumes people within the camp. And then there is a group within the nation that has a desire for meat. Very complicated story over here. And at this point, even Moshe Rabbeinu despairs of being their leader. How can I lead them? How can I provide meat for them? Very perplexing story, because after all, Moshe Rabbeinu brought 10 plagues in Egypt. He split the Red Sea. Bringing meat should not be such a daunting challenge. We've talked about this in the past. And God sends the quails, the slav, but it brings death and suffering. And then Miriam and Aaron, Moshe's siblings, slander him. And that concludes the parsha. And next week, of course, we have the debacle of the spies. And as a consequence, the Jews are condemned to remain in the desert for 40 years. So really, there's an entire genre of literature which discusses the rise and fall of various empires. Given the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, a more modern book, William Shirer, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. But the idea of rise and fall is an interesting thing. In other words, things are building up, developing, it reaches a peak, and somehow the peak is unsustainable. And once you reach the peak, then you slide down. And it seems that the lesson which is implicit in this literature is that as the nation is rising, the seeds for the nation's self-destruction are planted. In other words, if you're looking for the key to understanding the fall, you have to look back at the moment that the nation is about to reach its peak. And that is where the seeds of the ultimate destruction are planted. And sure enough, in this parsha, there's a very interesting thing. There is a story which is on the wrong side of the divide. In other words, the first calamity is in the first half and not in the second half. But to fully appreciate that, we have to look at the structure of Parshas Beha'alotcha. Whereas Parshas Beha'alotcha, really, in the beginning, is wrapping up the loose ends of the earlier Parshias. And finally, there's a discussion of the preparations for travel, the manufacture of the chatzotros, the trumpets, which are meant to be the signal, and we have a description of the first journey from Mount Sinai, and Moshe Rabbeinu's request that Yisro accompany them. And then we have two interesting verses. And these verses, if you look in a Torah scroll, are set off from what comes before and what follows by little signs, two inverted nuns. The letter nun is written in the Sefer Torah upside down before this little section and after this little section to set it off from what's before and what's after. And these two verses are very, very well-known verses because they've entered our liturgy. The first verse is Vayihi bin Salah ha'aron, which means Vayihi bin Salah ha'aron. We say this, of course, when they open the ark. So many people mistakenly believe it means when they opened the ark. It means when the ark traveled. That when the ark traveled through the desert, Vayomer Moshe said, Kuma Hashem, rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered from before you. And of course, we say this verse, or we sing this verse, when we open the ark to take out the Sefer Torah. In the next verse, Uvenucha Yomar, and when the ark came to rest, Moshe will say rather, Shuv Hashem, give rest Hashem to Rivavos Alpha Yisrael, to the 10,000s and thousands of Jews. And this verse, we say when we put the Sefer Torah back. Not as well known because this verse we tend not to sing. So it's not as noteworthy as the other verse. So these two verses are set off from what's before and what's after and describe what Moshe Rabbeinu said when the ark led them in their travels and when the ark finally came to rest. And then after that, you have the terrible disaster of the Misonanim, the people who complained about the weariness of the journey and the fires and so on and so forth. Now, the question is, why is this parsha set off by the two nuns? And why is it set off? So here, in the Gemara and the Shabbos, we have three explanations. One explanation is that these two verses are really a sefer. They are a book unto themselves. Because I would ask you, how many books are there in the Torah? So everyone knows the 5 books of Moses. But there's an opinion that really there are 7. There are 7 books. There's Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, Devarim at the end, that's 4, and BaMidbar really is 3 separate books. You have the verses before the first nun, that's a book. These 2 verses are a second book. And then what follows the second nun is the third book. Because really BaMidbar is not a single book, really it's 3 books. And that's why this little parsha is set off by the nun before and after to show the separation, the demarcation. That these 2 verses are a book in their own right, and what comes before is a separate book, and what follows is a separate book. I'll mention a very interesting thing the Balaturim says, that if you look at the first verse in the Torah, the first verse in the Torah is Bereshis bara Elokim eis hashamayim ve'eis ha'aretz. 7 words. If you look at the last verse in the Torah, U'lochol yad chazakah, won't put it by heart, there are 12 words. So the first verse in the Torah has 7 words, and the last verse in the Torah has 12 words. So the Balaturim says that if you look at these 2 psukim, the pasuk of Vahi bin Salah ha'aron has 12 words, and the pasuk of Nucha Yomar has 7 words. So it's not just that these 2 verses are a separate book. These 2 verses are equivalent to the entire Torah. because the Torah is sandwiched between a verse of 12 words and a verse of 7 words. And these two verses, one is 12 words and one is 7 words. So really, these two verses are, in a sense, not just a book, but really it's a core book. Okay, that's food for thought. Now, that's one opinion. And l'chora, at first glance, it makes a lot of sense why this should be a separate book, or this division of BaMidbar. Because everything that comes before this point, right, we're still on the ascent. We're still going up. And after this little interruption, as we said, everything goes downhill. So really, to say that everything which comes before the first nun, everything which comes after the second nun, really, these are two separate books, that makes perfect sense. And therefore the two verses which form the separation, that is the third book. Makes perfect sense. Now the Gemara brings another opinion, that the reason this verse, these two verses are inserted, is lahafsik bein puronos lepuronos. It's to separate calamity and calamity. Meaning that there's a calamity which happens before the first nun. And to separate from two calamities, these two verses were inserted, and that's why they're set off by the nuns to show that it's a separation. So, on that Gemara, Tosfos asks the question, well, the calamity which follows, we understand. The story of the misonim, the complaints, the desire for meat, everything. But if you look before, it doesn't seem there's any calamity. It says, Vayisu mehar Hashem, derech shloshos yomim. They traveled from the mountain of God for 3 days, and the ark traveled before them to seek rest for them. And it describes the travel from Har Sinai. Where's the calamity? What was the calamity that comes before Vahi bin Sohara? So Tosfos quotes a Medrash. The Medrash says that when the Jews left Har Sinai, and as we said, it was with great excitement, enthusiasm, they're going out to Eretz Yisrael, onto the Promised Land. Very, very excitement. Well, excitement is a very funny thing. You see, sometimes excitement is good. It's good to be enthusiastic about doing good things, but sometimes it can be a little too enthusiastic. And it says over here, that was the calamity that came before. The Jews were a little too enthusiastic. They left Har Sinai kitino kabareach mibeis hasefer, like children running away from school. Like children running away from school. So, this triumphant march to the Promised Land was a little too exuberant. But they ran away like a child running away from school. And we joke in yeshiva, in our business, that it's one thing that the children run away from school, but it's also that the teachers run away from school. That's for a different reason. But let's explore this. What is the idea of a child running away from school? Like, why do children run away from school? And it goes back to the entire story in the Gemara that we mentioned before. In other words, if a child could understand that everything that is taking place in the school is for the benefit of the child, if the child was on a level of sophistication to understand that, then the child would not run away. The child would beg for more. Because what is the school doing? What are the teachers doing? They are imparting the lessons that are necessary for life. So why should you run away? You should want more and more and more. Everything that's being done is being done for you. But the child doesn't understand that, right? The child is on a level of sophistication where he sees his self-interest in playing, having a good time, relaxing, etc., etc. What is going on in school? There are adults that are imposing their values on us for their own self-serving reasons. They see the teachers as enslaving them. as persecuting them, as tormenting them. Some of the teachers have satisfaction by making us learn all these unimportant, trivial, irrelevant things. And therefore, when the opportunity to escape comes, they run away. Because when it says that the Jews ran away from Har Sinai, like a child, now they weren't children, they were adults. But I suspect that's what it really means. In other words, they left Har Sinai because they looked at Sinai as a place where God imposes His will upon us, not as a place where God is giving us something which is really for our benefit, but rather where He's giving us something which is for His benefit. And therefore, when it's finally over, instead of there being a wistfulness, there's a sense of relief. Like, Baruch Hashem, it's over. No more. God is not going to make any more demands of us. And therefore, when they left Har Sinai, it was appropriate to be joyous, and there should have been jubilation because they're going to the promised land, to Eretz Yisrael, to their manifest destiny. But it was a little too exciting, a little too much exuberance. There was also this sense of joy and relief that God is not going to make any more demands of them. Now, we want to separate calamity from calamity. In other words, it's a very bad thing to have calamities that follow one after the other, after the other, after the other. So we want to have a separation. We put the separation right here. But that really means that this story is on the wrong side of the division. Right? This is a story of calamity, and therefore it really belongs after Vayhi ben Sahar, and after the second one. And it's on the wrong side. And that means because when you look for the seeds of destruction, is you have to look for them on the other side. You have to look at it for it on the side of the rise. That's where you find the elements that cause the ultimate downfall. So if you're looking for the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, you're going to find that the factors that brought about the fall of the Roman Empire really are rooted in the time of its greatest success. And likewise with the Third Reich, or whatever society, the rise and fall you analyze. If you want to analyze the rise and fall of the American economy. So we hope it's not a final fall, but the collapse of the economy is rooted in really the exuberance and the booming which took place through deregulation, etc., in the good times. So if you're looking for the seeds of the current crisis, you have to look back at a time when everything was good. So when the politicians were saying that this is great, this is the longest period of extended economic growth in the history of the country, and everything is fine, everything is wonderful, but it was at that time that really, and precisely in that exuberance, that the seeds of the ultimate downfall were planted. And if our conjecture is correct, the issue revolves precisely on this point. In other words, in God's dealings with us, is God acting out of self-interest, imposing His will upon us, or is He really doing everything for our good? Now, as we go through story after story, this is exactly the issue. Let's start with the first story. The first story after Vayhi ben Sahar. The people were complaining. They were complaining. Now the Torah doesn't say what they were complaining about, but it says Vayishma Hashem. God heard their complaints. Vayichar Apo, and He was very, very angry. Vativar ba'am eish Hashem, and a fire of God burned against them. V'taychal b'ktei ha'machane, it consumed people at the edge of the camp. And the place was called Tavei Ra. Tavei Ra means a consuming fire. Ki va'ar avam eish Hashem. So this is the first calamity. So what are they complaining about? I read you the Rashi. What they were complaining about is the same thing my daughter was complaining about in the story I told you. Rashi says they were complaining, says, "Oi!" Says, we've been traveling 3 days without a stop. They were tired out. And God was very upset. Why was God upset? So Rashi was reading Rashi. Ani hayisi miskaven l'tevashcha. My intention was for your good. Shetichnusu la'aretz miyad. That you should enter Eretz Yisrael immediately. Why should you have to travel the desert for a long period of time? Let's go. 3 days we'll be there. And the Jews didn't understand that. Why did the Jews understand that? Because from the Jewish perspective, they couldn't understand that God is doing something for them. Right? Why are we going to Eretz Yisrael? For us, because that's where God's office is, and that's where he needs us to work. Where he needs us to serve him. So they viewed it that way. Right? We're going to Eretz Yisrael because that's where God needs us to be to do his work. So okay, so what's the rush? You're pushing. If we're there a day later, it won't be good enough. What's the rush? But in reality, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing them to Eretz Yisrael? That's for us. That's our greatest fulfillment. That's our greatest joy. And therefore God was understandably upset by the Jewish people. But in reality, this story is really the exact same idea as the previous story. In other words, the leaving Har Sinai, Ketina Kabareachim Beis HaSefer, like a child running away from school, is exactly the same idea. The inability to understand that what we were being given in Har Sinai was for our benefit, and therefore there was a sense of relief when they ran away. It's the same story, just again and again and again. Nothing really changes. Now, we'll go on through the parasha, and we'll see that every story really is the exact same thing. This is the underlying idea of all the stories. But before we go to the next story, I just want to point out that if you look at the 2 verses of Vahi bin Sara ha'aron, these 2 verses, what Moshe Rabbeinu said when the Aron traveled, what Moshe Rabbeinu said when the Aron stopped, it's exactly this idea. That Moshe Rabbeinu is explaining that everything that God is doing is really for our benefit. For example, it says, Vahi bin Sara ha'aron, when the ark traveled, so Moshe said, rise up, God, and may your enemies be scattered, and may those who hate you flee. So Rashi says, who are these people? What is this a reference to? Obviously, this is a reference to the nations that are situated between us and Eretz Yisrael. When the Jews are traveling this pathway, and there are going to be people blocking the path, blocking the road, before Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael. So God is told to Moshe Rabbeinu that rise up and cause the enemies to scatter and to flee. But the verse calls them God's enemies, your enemies. Are they God's enemies? Whose enemies are they? They're the Jews' enemies. So Rashi says an amazing thing. Rashi says, Elu Seinei Yisrael. When it talks about the enemies, it refers to the enemies of the Jewish people. Shekol ha-Seinei es Yisrael, Sonei es mi she'amar v'ayah ha'olam. If you hate the Jewish people, you hate God. Shenamar, it says in the verse, U'misanecha nasi roish, your enemies lifted up their heads, Al amcha yarimu sod, and they conspire against your people. What Moshe Rabbeinu was saying is that God's fundamental interest is not in himself. God's fundamental interest is in the Jewish people. That's what's important to God, the Jewish people. So if you are an enemy of the Jewish people, therefore you are an enemy of God automatically. It wouldn't be the case. If God had some self-interest, so being an enemy of the Jewish people wouldn't necessarily make you an enemy of God. In other words, let's say Ruvain is my friend. Right, he's my friend. But Ruvain's enemy isn't necessarily my enemy. Because he may be opposed to Ruvain in some area which I'm uninvolved. But God has no other interest. God is selfless. God's only concern is for the Jewish people. So if you are an enemy of the Jewish people, you are an enemy of God. So therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu davens, when he prays to the Ribono Shel Olam, that he should cause the enemies of Yisrael to flee, how does he refer to them? As the enemies of God. They're your enemies. And when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks, when the ark comes to rest, he says, Shuva Hashem Ruv V'Yisrael Yisrael, give rest to the thousands and 10,000s. In other words, that it isn't that now it's God's time to rest, and therefore we rest. Imagine a king who's traveling, and there's an entourage, big entourage. So when does the entourage stop? When it's time for the king to rest. But that's not what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Right? When does the ark rest? When it's time for the Jews to rest. Because the Kadosh Baruch Hu has no interest. His interest is in our welfare. So when it's time for us to rest, that's when it's time for the Shekhinah to rest. So these two verses of Moshe Rabbeinu, they depict the Ribono Shel Olam, they depict God as having no self-interest, only being interested in the welfare of the Jewish people. This is such an important lesson that these two verses are a book. What makes a book? You know, the book means there's some theme that runs through the book. And it has to be a very important theme, because otherwise it would only be a part of a book. It wouldn't be a complete book. But this theme, that God's motives are not self-serving, rather they are for our welfare, is so important that these two verses are a book unto themselves. And comes to Baal HaTurim and says that not only are they a book unto themselves, they are the essence of the entire Torah. And therefore the Torah is really nothing more than what's between the two bookends, one of which has 12 words, one of which has 7 words. And here you have the two verses, one has 12 words and one has 7 words. So it's really the summation of the entire Torah. The most fundamental principle of the entire Torah is contained in these two verses. So the Torah is an expansion of this idea, but really it's all there. It's all there.
Question. Is it that God's interest is in the Jews because they are the Jews, or because they are his tool for fulfilling the mission that he has?
This is an issue which we don't have to discuss at this point, but I'll tell you what I mean. Even if God's interest in the Jews is in the fact that they bring a virtue and truth to all mankind, that just means that God's interest is in mankind. Because either way, it's not a self-interest. Because God created the world, He created humanity to bestow benefit on them. Now the question over here is God's intention to bestow benefit on a subset of mankind? Was it on the totality of mankind, and therefore the selection of the Jewish people as a vehicle toward that end? I believe the latter is true. But either way, right, the point is that God did not create the world because He needs anything. In other words, He is acting out of the interest in the created beings, and that is the fundamental message of the Torah. In other words, if you don't get that point, then everything else is distorted, everything else is twisted. And therefore these two verses, which really contain this idea, really are the essence of the entire Torah. Now I mentioned two of the opinions in Masechah Shabbos. One is that, again, it's a book in its own right, and the second is that it's a separation between calamity and calamity. The truth is it's not a contradiction. It could be a book in its own right and a separation between calamity and calamity, as we said, that the first calamity is on the wrong side of the division. But there's another opinion in the Gemara, a third opinion, which says that these two verses don't belong here. That the reason the nuns are there to set them off is because these two verses really belong in the book, in the Parsha of BaMidbar. Because in the Parsha of BaMidbar, that is where the general procedure for travels is described, and therefore, if this is what Moshe Rabbeinu said at every juncture, it should have been back there. And therefore, it was put here to tell us this isn't the place. Now, I want to point out that when we say it's not the place, so it means out of place? What does it mean? See, it really means exactly this. It's out of place because it's an idea which separates two episodes where it's clear that the people didn't get it. So it's like, imagine a congregation which is guilty of some horrific sin that it commits every Friday night and every Saturday afternoon. And the entire congregation commits the sin. I don't know what the sin would be. You can imagine for yourself. And the rabbi gives a sermon about this, Shabbos morning, just about this point. And everyone laughs it off and just goes on doing what they did the night before. So obviously, somebody doesn't get it. Well, in one way, the people don't get it. In another way, the rabbi doesn't get it. The rabbi speaks in this topic. Obviously, he has misunderstood his audience. In other words, this is something which is so deeply rooted that they just go back to it after the sermon. That means they're not at the point where they can hear this. Whatever Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching in these verses, to insert it at this point is laughable in a way, because it's a lesson which obviously the Jews did not get. Because the two episodes, the one that precedes and the one that follows, are both examples of the Jewish people clearly seeing that God's motivation is self-interest, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu depicting God as selfless and being concerned only for the welfare of the Jewish people. In a way, it's a very, very appropriate theme to be brought up just at this point, but really, it's out of place. In other words, putting it here obviously means that the Jews did not get it. In any case, we go ahead, and as we mentioned, the next story, the story about the complaint of the Jews for meat, is also a very, very difficult story to understand. And as we mentioned, even Moshe Rabbeinu despaired of how could he lead the people, how could he provide them meat. And we asked the question that this shouldn't have been a big deal for Moshe Rabbeinu, because after all, Moshe Rabbeinu performed bigger miracles than providing meat. What is the problem? We mentioned many, many times the very wonderful interpretation of the Or Sameach. And the Gemara tells us that the mon fell in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. It fell in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. And what does that mean? That when we receive sustenance in the schus, in the merit of a tzaddik, and what does that mean? Obviously, we don't deserve it, so it comes from the merit of the tzaddik, but what is the mechanism by which this happens? So we explained that the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does in the world are really in order that we should come to an appreciation of God's kindness, of His chesed, of His mercy. But that's why God performs His kindnesses. We should come to understand Him, to appreciate Him, to thank Him. Now, what about a kindness which to us seems inadequate, not good enough, a little cheap, a little short? So obviously, when we receive this kindness, we're going to complain. It's not good enough. Now, I'll just tell you a funny story, just to illustrate this. There's a Jew here in Toronto, a very wonderful person. His name is Israel Reichman. Israel Reichman, his day job, he owns a travel agency, but he really is involved tremendously with Bikur Cholim and helping people are hospitalized, and really, he goes all out. So as part of his activity, he tries to befriend the various nurses in the hospitals. Because, if you want to get something done, who takes care of it? It's the nurses, not so much the doctors. So if you have the nurses on your side, So he brings bagels all the time to the nurses, and they appreciate it. They have long shifts, and they'll do anything for him. Anyway, there's a fellow who says, "Listen, I can also bring bagels. What's the big deal? And I'll do the same thing." So this fellow bought bagels, comes to the nurses, "I brought you bagels." So the nurse is saying, "Where's the cream cheese?" Rabbi always brings cream cheese. In other words, when you are accustomed to perfect treatment, anything which is less is like you're not satisfied. So, from a perspective of fairly small people in relation to Moshe Rabbeinu, what is man? How did the Jews look at man? They never were satisfied with it. It's plain, it's drab, it's white, always looks the same. Built the Elamone, all we see is man. Sunday man, Monday man, Tuesday man, Wednesday man, always looks the same, tastes the same.
Friday doesn't.
They always complain. Now, so who could appreciate man? Who was able to appreciate man? Only Moshe Rabbeinu. He could appreciate man, because Moshe Rabbeinu was on a spiritual level that he could see that man is the most wonderful food. As the Ramban says, man is the radiance of the Shekhinah that became solidified. That's what man is. Man is the radiance of the Shekhinah solidified. You are eating holiness. You're eating divine light. So to Moshe Rabbeinu, man was an unbelievable gift. Meat? Well, what's meat in comparison to man? If God would send meat, Moshe Rabbeinu would say, "Where's the man? Where's the cream cheese? Where's the man?" Right? So Moshe Rabbeinu, meat is none. Says, but to lower people, right, when they got man, what did they say? "Where's the meat?" Meat. If you give us meat, have something, meat. Right? Man? Who wants man? So therefore, if God performs the miracles and sends the sustenance, that we should come to appreciate His chesed, His kindness, who was the one who would appreciate man? There was only one person who would appreciate man. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. So therefore, the man came b'schus Moshe Rabbeinu. The man came in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the only person that, if he would see man as opposed to meat, he would say, such a Kiddush Hashem. Now, the people, they want meat, so Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't bring meat. In my merit, only man can come. But in my merit, meat can't come, because from my perspective, meat is a second best. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, this is a big problem. Therefore, you have to gather 70 elders. You have to gather 70, what's the story? Look it up. 70 leaders to assist you in leading the people. And the meat can come in their merit. They're not in your level. They're on the level where their appreciation of meat is greater than man. They can bring meat. But let's understand what's really going on over here. So it's the same issue. Just back to the story with my daughter. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in providing man, is giving the Jews the best possible thing imaginable. But they are not on the level of sophistication to understand it. And from their perspective, they're getting something which is second best, or maybe even 10th best. The best thing would be meat, which Moshe Rabbeinu can't provide. He says, did I give birth to this nation that I should carry them in my arms like a nurse carries a child? That's Moshe Rabbeinu's words. What do you mean by that? In other words, because when you take care of a small child and you want to amuse the child, what do you have to do? You have to, in a sense, put yourself in the child's shoes. You know, that's why when adults take care of children, they start talking like children. They babble like children because they're trying to get down to the child's level. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, is that what I'm expected to do? I'm expected to get down to their level? I can't do that. And this is the first time that Moshe Rabbeinu was expected to do such a thing. The fact that he split the Red Sea and brought 10 makas from Paro, that's not a problem at all. But here, to bring meat, which means to lower himself to the level where meat is preferable to mum, that he can't do. That he can't do. But this is really the problem. The problem is because when a person is on the level of sophistication, where we can't understand that what God is doing is the very best for me, so what does he really believe? That God is giving us what is best for him. And he's not giving what is best for me. And that dissatisfaction is at the root of the whole story. And by the way, this inability to get down to the people's level is really a tragic problem, and really can't go into it, the hour's late, is really the root of the issue that Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed to lead them into Eretz Yisrael. But that's really for another time. But in any case, but this is really the idea, I believe, the theme of the parsha. And the seeds of this problem are really evident in the story that comes before the last story in the first section of the parsha. And this is something that we have to grapple with also. We have to be on a very high level of sophistication. That requires learning and contemplation to understand that really what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us is really the best for us. The best for us. And if we are going to twist that and tell ourselves that really this is not in our self-interest, that God wants servants, he wants service, and therefore he's giving us the Torah and making demands of us for his own selfish reasons, then if you get your kicks out of being a martyr, okay, it's very nice, but it can't last too long. It's going to be very hard to motivate yourself day after day after day to be a martyr. Most people will act for their own self-interest. But that's not what Torah is all about. The yesod of Torah, as encapsulated in those two verses, the Ibn Sor of Nuchi Omar, is that God's interest is in our welfare. And everything God demands of us is really to help us, to give our lives meaning and direction and purpose and fulfillment. And if we can learn that lesson, then we've mastered the most fundamental lesson of Torah.
Go ahead.